Hare Krishna. Welcome back to our study of the Yoga Sutras. So now we are entering into the most esoteric section of the book, where Patanjali is going to very clearly, objectively explain to us this whole Samadhi spectrum, the journey towards the perfected stage of Nirvija Samadhi. Right? In Sutras number 44 and 45, today we are going to continue our discussion from where we left off in the previous sutra. In the previous section, we saw this concept of samapatti, or complete absorption, and there it was still on the basis of tarka, savitarka and vitarka samapatti. So now Patanjali is going to talk about the next stage, which is using the concept of reflection or vichara. So let's understand this concept. So this is how the sutra goes. Etyeva savichara nirvichara cha sukshma vishaya vyakhyata. What does he say? Etyeva, in the same way as in the previous two sutras, how Patanjali delineated the concept of savitarka and nirvitarka. In the same way, he is going to talk about savichara and nirvichara, that is with reflection and super non-reflective. Now, a little note here. Many times in the Vedic literature, when we use the word of opposites like this as nirvichara or nirvitarka, right? So when we use, or nirguna, example, another word that is used, right? Now the word or the prefix nir may mean like opposite, but rather here, rather than saying it is not reflective, but rather it is beyond reflective, right? Just like the term gunas, a conditioned soul is bound by gunas. We are influenced by these three modes of material nature of sattva, rajas and tamas. But when an advanced yogi is described as nirguna, or without these material modes, it means that they do not become void, but rather they enter into a state which is beyond the gunas, where they have transcended the gunas. So when we see such similar terminologies here, savichara and nirvichara. So in savichara, the yogi is contemplating in a very reflective way, and in nirvichara, one transcends even the need of that reflective meditation and enters into a higher state. It is not that he stops reflection, but rather one transcends the need for even that reflection. That is how absorbed the chitta becomes, right? Cha, and so these two things, sukshma vishaya. So what is that reflection happening upon? On the subtle nature of objects, and vyakhyata are explained. Now the word vyakhyata is a very interesting word in Sanskritam. Vyakhyata is a term that is used not in general sense of explaining things, but rather explaining things that which one has personally experienced. So this explanation is not an abstract theoretical explanation, but rather it is a very deep personal experience. After having gone through that experience, now I am expounding my own personal experiences. That is the connotation behind the term vyakhyata. So let's see the translation now. In the same way, both savichara, reflective, and nirvichara, super reflective or non-reflective, samapatti, which are contemplation upon subtle objects, are going to be explained. So at this point, it will be good to very quickly recall, if you remember, when we discussed sutra number 17, vitarka vichara ananda asmita rupa sampragyataha, where Patanjali explained the concept of how a yogi is consciously trying to enter into that state of samadhi, right? It is not a very natural, free-flowing samadhi, which is what happens in nirvija samadhi, but rather in the beginning of the spectrum of samadhi, the yogi is still using their physical awareness, forcing that physical awareness, into that state of samadhi. And we saw those four methods of vitarka, vichara, ananda, asmita, how these were used to gradually involute. And you saw that example of how I am meditating on a rose. I am experiencing a rose. I am experiencing, and to the point of I am. This vitarka, vichara, ananda, asmita, how even if you look at it from the sentence also, how the sentence is involuting. So this method of going into the subtlest and the subtler states of being, or involution, the term that we used throughout, right? This is going to be elaborated in this particular section. So in the previous two sutras, we saw the concept of how even vitarka in itself, this method of meditation based on reasoning on an object in itself had two stages, where one is entering into that stage, which was called as savitarka, And as you are transcending even the need for reasoning, that is called nirvitarka. And then now one is entering into the state of savichara, where one proceeds by reflecting on that object, right? Reflecting on the experience of that object, and gradually one transcends even that and goes so deep in one's experience. And that state is called as nirvichara. And of course, then you will see here Ananda and Asmita, these two stages do not have a beginning and an end, right? I'll explain that a little later today, right? But this spectrum of savitarka, nirvitarka, savichara, nirvichara, Ananda and Asmita, right? These are all the stages that Patanjali is going to talk about in this particular section, right? So coming back to our sutra again, it says that this savichara and nirvichara samapattis can also be understood in the same way, because in savichara what happens is the yogi still holds on to this conception of time and space. One is seeing that, oh look, I am now meditating on a rose, I am now trying to experience a rose, right? So if you notice that the moment you say I am experiencing, so which means that there is a present continuous going on, right? Which moment you talk about present tense, past tense, future tense, these are all operating within the domain of time, which means internally there is still a small conception of time which is still operating in the yogi's awareness, right? Unlike in a very deep state of samadhi, the yogi even loses that conception of time, and that is what happens in the state of nirvichara samapatti. At that particular stage, one is so absorbed in that object of meditation that one even forgets that, hey, I'm meditating on it. You know, it's like that concept, because what does time do to us? Time creates a sense of causality, a cause and effect, right? I did this, therefore now I'm experiencing this. I'm meditating on a rose, therefore I'm experiencing a rose. You know, that sense of causality, cause and effect. In nirvichara samapatti, even that vanishes, right? Literally, the yogi transcends the concept of time and space. What do I mean by transcending the concept of time and space, right? Even though physically the yogi may be sitting in this world, which is operated by time, internally in their consciousness, they are not experiencing the passage of time. And mind you, this is where things get even more deeper and complicated. Our experience of time is very much defined by our consciousness. I'm sure many of us would have had, a remote experience of this, where sometimes when you are really enjoying something, when you're totally into it, you feel like, hey, this time just passed by in a whisker. And sometimes when you're not enjoying something, you'll feel like, oh my God, when is this ordeal going to end? When is this particular event going to end, right? So you feel like, time has stretched. So this is this concept of dilation of time, expansion or compression of time. The yogic understanding was, it is not just about, even modern science talks about the concept of time dilation based on, gravity and, the speed of your travel, etc., and so on. There are some physical parameters that they define. But in the yogic understanding, time, or the flow of time, the speed at which the time is flowing, is something very much dependent on our consciousness, right? The more advanced we are, we'll not realize the passage of time. And the more lower in our consciousness, we'll see like, time is like an eternity. It's like it never seems to be, proceeding further, right? So at that particular stage, one transcends in the concept of time and space, and the object of meditation, that pratyaya, even that starts to involute, which means the yogi no more sees just the rose or an experience of the rose. One goes into the fine nuances of that object of meditation, right? You're not looking at the rose just as the petals and color, but you're so absorbed in experience, and you may go even finer and finer in your experiences. Just to explain, to give a worldly, our modern scientific, simile to this concept of involution, right? So if you look at it, if they take ice, for example, right? Ice is just solid block, right? That is one level of perception. But somebody with deeper vision will perceive that same ice. Oh, this is not ice exactly. This is actually solidified water. somebody can look at it even more as a deeper experience, saying, no, this is actually solidified condensed vapor. One is perceiving the vapor which has been condensed and transformed into water, and that water has solidified and become ice. You see, they are all the same, but your perception has become more subtler because solid water is more grosser than the subtle vapor. And one can involute even further that understanding. It's not just solidified condensed vapor, but it is solidified condensed hydrogen and oxygen particles that are together, atoms that are together. Or one can go even further. One looks at ice and one understands. Like again, when I say understanding or meditating, these words may not properly capture what the real state of the yogi is, because it is not an intellectual exercise. Right now at our level, it could be, we are looking at it from a scientific intellectual perspective, but at that stage, that becomes the very nature of that being, of that object which is being observed. One no more gets stuck in the gross conceptual forms, something that we discussed in the previous sutra as well, right? One transcends even the pre-conceptual notions, and one enters into a deep state. One starts to look, now the same water vapor can also be seen as, atoms, and even those atoms can be seen as subatomic particles. Now, it is not that, a yogi starts developing an X-ray vision of seeing only atoms and subatomic particles, electrons and neutrons everywhere, right? That is not the understanding here, but rather in one inner being, one understands that, ultimately all of this that I'm seeing is that fundamental state of matter. One no more gets lost in those external shapes and forms, but rather one sees that, look, ultimate reality is this building blocks of these fundamental particles of matter. That is a conception that one yogi enters into. This is what is a concept of involution that we spoke about, right? And then what happens next? So this is how, and to give a good example, Swami Hariharananda, another classical commentator, he gives this beautiful example of, how a yogi goes through these four stages of Savitarka, Nirvitarka, Savichara, and Nirvichara, giving the example of a sun. So the stage of Savitarka Samapati, Samapati absorption, at that stage, one is just gazing at the sun without any distraction. One is not even seeing the clouds. One is not even seeing where perhaps a mountain in the backdrop, or the sky, none of those. That the sun becomes the only object in their awareness. That is that perfect deep stage of Samadhi. And beyond that, at Nirvitarka Samapati, one even forgets the notion that, the preconceptual notion that, look, that is actually a sun. One is so absorbed in the sight of the sun that one sees, oh, what is that luminous object, right? And one gets completely absorbed in that. And even beyond that conception of that being like a globe, a luminous globe out there shining brightly, one sees actually what I'm meditating upon is that collection of fire particles, because earth, water, fire, air, ether, these are the fundamental building blocks of this world. One notices only that fire particle. That is what I'm actually interacting with. That's what I'm contemplating or experiencing, right? And one goes even deeper than that. One sees actually even what is that fire. It is just a representation of that omnipresent eternal light, which is there throughout this creation. One goes even one step beyond even that fire as an element and understands, oh, this represents that light, that same light which is emanating from the spiritual reality, which is the effulgence of the Lord. One starts meditating on that based on their conceptions, their spiritual conceptions, right? See how from sun to that one conception of eternal light, how the object of meditations becomes subtler and subtler. One is involuting that object of meditation, right? And to what point will this involution continue? Very nicely, Patanjali explains in Sutra number 45, where he says, Sukshma Vishayatvam Chalinga Paryavasanam, right? Sukshma means subtle, just like how from the gross sun to the subtle light. The Sukshma Vishayatvam, this whole objective perception from the gross to the subtle, where does it end? Right? It ends to the state of a linga. Right? A linga means a form, a shape. Right? A linga means something that is undefined. So this undefined state of prakriti is what is called as pradhana. That primordial element, that the first initial state of matter, where material energy is without any shape or form, or without any distinguishable characteristics, right? Even from a modern scientific perspective, when modern science says that in the beginning of creation there was this primordial soup of all material elements, of all matter, all material particles, right? Of course, this is a much more refined and subtle understanding, right? Or to give you another simile to understand the concept of pradhan, right? If you look at food that we eat, right? We eat varieties of foods, we eat fruits, we eat vegetables, we eat grains, etc. But from a Sankhya philosophy perspective, or from a yoga philosophy perspective, all the food that we eat is actually a transformation of soil, transformation of the dirt, because ultimately that is the base, that is a substrata from which all of this is manifesting, right? So in the soil, an advanced yogi can see, oh, there is the potential for fruit, there's a potential for vegetable, there's a potential for grains, right? So the food and the grains, etc., they are all the definable manifestations of Prakriti, whereas soil is that one primordial manifestation of food, right? So likewise, all this variety of matter that we see, earth, water, fire, air, ether, our own mind, intelligence, the ahankar, the ego, all of those, before they manifested, it's all there in a subtle state called as a pradhana. And this pradhana undergoes transformations, and that creates this whole material variety. Just like how you take gold, right? The raw gold ore that you get in the mines, but that same gold undergoes transformations, and it becomes different. It becomes bangles, it becomes earrings, it becomes necklace, it becomes rings, right? It's going through varieties of modifications, right? And sometimes that gold, when mixed with another metal, it becomes an alloy. So then the modifications are even more imperceptible, right? So just by, at least when you look at a gold ring, you understand how gold is. But when you look at an alloy, you cannot even understand how that original gold could be. That is how deeply these transformations can go through. Another example you can think of is carbon. Literally, most of the products that we use are carbon compounds, right? But when you think of your iPhone, right, which has some element of carbon in it, and you think of coal, you just can't connect this coal with this black sticky stuff. This has transformed into this iPhone. We cannot make that connection, but still at a fundamental level, there is that same carbon in that phone. Likewise, there is that pradhan in all the variety of matter that we see. So this involution will go on and on and on to the subtlest state of material reality called as pradhan, right? And these are all at this stage very abstract concepts for us, right? But these are the deeper realizations that Patanjali is sharing, because he has experienced these, and this is what is happening inside the consciousness of an advanced yogi. So where does this journey of involution continue? That is something that we'll see in the subsequent sutras. Thank you all for joining us today. See you in the next session. Hare Krishna.